My name's Glynn Henderson. I'm a chartered health and safety consultant. I work specifically in film and television. The course I've been running today is called Managing Safety in Film and Television. It's a course designed to train the people who work in the film and television industry on how to have a common sense approach at managing safety on set. Basically, this industry is potentially quite dangerous. We do lots of things that, like setting people on fire, people jumping out of buildings, crashing cars, shooting guns, fencing, fighting, all sorts of things. And now and again, it goes wrong, and it can cause quite serious accidents. But luckily, it doesn't happen all that often. Normally, the productions run quite safe, despite the fact that we're doing all these dangerous things. And the reason that we do it safely is because most of the people working on it have been properly trained. They go through courses like this, where they learn what the risks are and the sort of common sense things that you need to do to make it safe. People fly out to oil rigs to get oil from the North Sea. The flying out to oil rigs is very dangerous. They've done everything they can possibly do to try and make it safe. They're still trying to make it safer, but we can't make it any safer, but we still do it. So health and safety is not about avoiding risk. All it's about is taking real practical measures to reduce the risk as much as we possibly can. If you're an employer, you have got to provide a safe place of work for your employees, wherever that place is, but this balance is far reasonable practical. We can't cover everything in cotton wool to make it safe. The world is full of dangers, dangers. Even walking down the road and crossing roads, driving a car, these things are all dangerous because people get killed doing them. Health and safety is not about that. Health and safety is about trying to do your best to avoid causing accidents. As I said, this is a dangerous industry, and if we don't manage safety, then people will get hurt. So this course is about teaching people all the things that go wrong. What I do is I talk about the typical types of accidents that happen when we're filming on vehicles. Cameras in vehicles, cameras on vehicles, filming vehicles passing, racing cars, all that kind of stuff. All these things have got the potential to go wrong and cause serious accidents. When we're filming fight scenes, there's always a possibility of somebody actually being hit, somebody falling to the ground and being hurt. You can even be hurt falling on a crash mat. There's certain things that you've got to do. The course is specifically about managing risk and how to do risk assessments. This is a big issue for lots of people in the industry. It's like this filling in a form. How do we do it? Well, the idea is to show people that it's actually not that difficult. It's here's the process. You just identify what could go wrong and try and decide what can we do sensibly to try and reduce the risk of it going wrong. You might not be able to reduce the risk completely. There's always going to be the chance that it could go wrong, but what you do is you say, well, how safe can we make it? And that's it. Can we try and stop hurting people? It's as simple as that. We have got to cooperate with our employer, whatever they do to make it safe for us. We should not endanger ourselves, right, or others by what we do. And we must carry out and make a record of our assessment. So we must do our assessment and we must record it in some way. Negligence, if somebody gets injured at work and it's your fault, you could find yourself having to defend yourself in court. So part of the course covers legislation, specifically the Health and Safety at Work Act. That's the main law of the land. It sets out what employers have got to do to make it safe for everyone. And there's this duty that employers have to create a safe place of work. But it's as far as is reasonably practical. So it's a case of they've got to do anything that's reasonably practical to do, but sometimes you've got to take the risk because there's no reasonable practical thing to make it safe. As I said, setting somebody on fire, that's going to be, pretty dangerous. But there are controls we put in place that reduce the likelihood of the person being hurt, but sometimes it still goes wrong. So we talk about this legislation, we talk about the legislation that covers the need for doing risk assessments. It's a legal obligation, we've got to do it, we've got to make a record of it. So the course covers what employers have to know. In other words, the employer is the person in charge, so the producer is the employer. But the producer can't be all places at all times. So they've got to cascade responsibilities down the management chain. So like heads of departments, they take on certain responsibilities of the employer, and all the way down to like the line supervisor, the first AD, they hold responsibilities. But we all hold responsibilities, even the person, the runner, the person who's at the bottom of the chain, they're responsible under health and safety regulations. So the course imparts the information that they have to know how to carry out those responsibilities. Lots of things about hazards. How does that differ from risk? What is risk?
The likelihood of engage with that hazard.
Whether or not you engage with it, maybe, yeah.
The likelihood of it happening.
The likelihood, exactly that's what it means. So you've got a hazard. The risk is the likelihood that that hazard will cause harm. A hazard on its own cannot cause harm. A hazard, like if you've got a hole in the ground and it's in a backyard, the hole in the ground on its own will not cause any harm. It can only cause harm when there's some kind of interaction with it. So in other words, somebody puts their foot down it, then it becomes an accident. If you have to do a risk assessment and you don't have a form, because I often do risk assessments, but I don't have a form, what I do is I open up a pad and I do a risk assessment on the spot, right? So I've been in locations where something's changed, something's happened, I do a risk assessment. As long as you follow these 5 steps, you will do a good risk assessment. The first one is identify the hazards. Now that makes sense because you don't know what to assess if you don't know what the hazards are. So the first thing is you have a wee look about and you find out what the hazards are. There's lots of different ways to do that. It could be a case of just thinking it through and using your brain to come up with what you think the hazards will be. It could be a case of you go and look at the location or whatever it is you're doing. It could be that you ask questions of people. It could be you do a bit of research. You identify what the hazards are. Once you know what the hazards are, it says decide who might be harmed and how. Make a record of it. Now that can be a case of writing it down in a form. It can be typing it up on a computer. It can be doing it on your iPhone. And of course once you've done that, whatever it is you decide to do, you put it in place. Earth defenders, life jackets. Why did we make a record of it?
In case it goes to court.
It's good for that. If it goes to court, you've got a record to say, look, I did a risk assessment. But it's not the main reason.
Legal requirement.
It's a legal requirement, right? It's the law. I've been lucky to work in some amazing films in Scotland. The most recent one I worked in Scotland is a film called What We Did on Our Holiday. And that was starring Billy Connolly, David Tennant. But some of the bigger ones, a Universal Studios film filmed in Scotland that was called The Eagle. It starred Channing Tatum and Jamie Bell. It was hard going. They decided to film that in November in Scotland, right? The weather was terrible. Most days it was driving horizontal rain, and they were using rain machines as well, right? We had natural rain, high winds. For 2 weeks we filmed down a 100-foot deep canyon in a river, so we were walking about in knee-deep water all the time. People were suffering from hypothermia. Jamie Bell and Channing Tatum had to get washed down waterfalls. Myself and the stuntman, we had to check out the waterfalls to make sure that nothing could harm them. I was getting washed down the waterfalls to check it out, but I was wearing a wetsuit and a helmet, stuff like that. The artists, they had to wear like Roman costumes. So trying to keep them from getting hypothermia was the big issue. A couple of years ago, I worked on a Hansel and Gretel movie, Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. It was a big Paramount movie We filmed that in East Germany, most of the time in studios in Berlin. Every day that involved flying witches, so we're in forests, and we had witches wired up to take off on brooms, flying between trees. We had cameras, you know, on wires, following them, shooting through the trees, explosions, gunfire, bullet hits. I also worked on the Paramount movie World War Z. I was offered the job in the UK, but I was doing other work, so I had to knock it back. But what they did was, when it came to the end of filming in the UK, they called me and said, would you like to cover the last 6 weeks we're filming in Hungary? So I went there, I was on set with Brad Pitt every day. We had 600 extras, fighting, we had explosions going off, fighting the zombies. We had people on the top of buildings shooting, shooting the zombies. We had zombies being piled in big piles and set in fire, right, to burn them. Of course, we'd swap real people for dummies and stuff like that. With people throwing petrol, Molotov cocktails, so bottles full of fluid. A couple of times the stunt guys that were throwing it, they blew up in their hands and their hands got set in fire. We had 4 wind machines, because it was supposed to be in Russia in the winter. We had 4 wind machines and snow getting driven all the time, so every shot they had to redress the floor, and it was amazing. But the conditions, it was cold. Because of the snow, your brain made it colder. And in the wind and the driving snow, you had constant dust, so people's noses were getting blocked, and everyone complained. Every day I was getting people come up and saying these conditions are terrible, and so. But they weren't good, but they weren't life-threatening. The thing is that people were coming up and saying to me, these conditions, are these healthy? Is this okay for me to breathe in stuff in? I was kind of going like, you're breathing that in, so. But yeah, I've worked in, since I left the BBC in 2008, I've worked on 36 films, most of them in Scotland, Lots of really big, high budget ones, lots and lots of really low budget ones. The thing about the low budget ones is they don't have the money to do all the things that we can do for safety that the big budgets do. So what I've got to do is to try and work out how we can do things as safe as possible, as cheap as possible. And therein lies that they're trying to get this proper balance. Do you have to have the hazard there? Can you remove it? If you can remove it, then you don't have to bother about it again. So that is clearly the best result. So that's the start. The thing about fire extinguishers is I like to see fire extinguishers on the path out. I hate when people put fire extinguishers in the middle of places, and you get it quite a lot in film sets. Fire extinguishers dotted about inside the film set. That means that when there's a fire, somebody runs into the set to try and find the fire extinguisher. Yeah. Don't like that at all, because they could find themselves in a really serious position. What I want is people are getting away from the fire, and usually when they get to the door where they can get out, so they're now a place where they can get to safety, they can now pick up the fire extinguisher and make a decision. Am I going to go back there or not, right? Yeah, the fire's getting a bit out of hand, I think I'll just leave, But if you're inside the set, you don't have that choice. And the most common cause of fire in a workplace these days is an electrical fault. It used to be smoking, but because of the smoking ban, the most common cause now is electrical faults. In this industry, the likelihood of an electrical fault is greater than it is in a lot of other industries, because what we have is we've got all this gear, it's thrown in and out of vans, dropped, dragged along pavements, and I've seen plugs getting dragged along cobbles, getting put up, put down, So the chances of it being damaged are greater, so the chances of it causing a fire are greater. One of the common causes, and I see this all the time, right? I walk into production offices and I see this all the time. I see, like, they move in temporarily to this empty office, and what they do is they get a socket and they stick a plug in the socket with a 4-way extension. Then somebody sticks a 4-way extension onto that, then somebody sticks a 4-way extension onto that, and then they start plugging stuff into it. And what you've got is a socket that's designed to handle 13 amps. Somebody's got a fire in it, the fire is drawing 10 amps. They put a photocopier in it, the photocopier's drawing 5 amps. You're now drawing 15 amps. Then they start plugging in printers and everything. You're now drawing 20 amps through this socket. It's only designed to deal with 13. In fact, that cable there is only designed to deal with 13. And this is what you get. Overheating. One of the other benefits about coming to a course like this, apart from learning the new skills and how to manage safety and keep yourself safe and keep other people safe, is this is covered by a thing called the Production Safety Passport Scheme. The Production Safety Passport Scheme is a thing that was set up by all the big players in film and television in the UK. You know, the BBC, ITV, Sky, big independent companies. And it was to try and create a training course that covered safety that they would all accept was the standard in the industry. So what happens is, at the end of this course, they all get a safety passport. And basically speaking, it's a booklet. And in the booklet, it's got a record of the fact that they trained this course. Their name goes down in a database that all the organisations can check. So if they go for a job and they say, we've been on a health and safety training course, the company can check and say, oh, actually, you're registered on the course, you have done this. And every time they go for refresher training, it gets registered on the database and they have it on their passport. And what it means to them is that if they're applying for a job and maybe they've got half a dozen other people who are also going for the same job, the fact that they've had this course and they've done the training, it makes them more desirable for somebody who's not been trained. Because all the big companies like Sky, like the BBC, they've got a rule that says you can't start working until you've been safety trained. And for a producer, if you come on safety trained, they don't have to actually give you a day off to go and do the course. So it makes you more attractive than the person who's not been safety trained. So on your CV, it can make you more attractive to the person who's not. So it's one other tick in the box for making yourself a bit more employable.